Welcome to The Long Run. This is a podcast for biotech adventurers. I'm your host, Luke Timmerman. Today's guest is Krishna Yeshwant. Krishna is a general partner with GV, the corporate venture firm formerly known as Google Ventures. He is something of a rare bird, a Stanford computer scientist and a Harvard physician. With this combination of professional interests, and with the resources of Google to invest in fledgling companies, Krishna has acquired an unusual vantage point on where things are going and where they could go in biotech and healthcare. GV, like most corporate venture firms, doesn't promote itself as much as traditional venture firms that need to hit up limited partners for new cash every 3 to 5 years. Krishna doesn't talk to the media a whole lot. I enjoy talking with him on a semi-regular basis and do appreciate this extended look into his thinking on the podcast. He has his hands in a huge number of pies in biopharma, in genomic diagnostics, and in biology and healthcare-related software. Krishna also recently turned 40, a traditional time to take stock on one's work. And here's one safe bet. He will be around a long time, keeping his finger on the pulse of biology and computing. Now, before we dive in, a word from our sponsor. Yeah, you heard that right. Longtime listeners and subscribers to Timmerman Report know I spend all day reporting, thinking, writing, and speaking about biotech. It's what I do. Focusing like this is both good and bad. It doesn't leave me a whole lot of time for classical business tasks like, sales and marketing of my own sole proprietorship. I've been a little stressed at seeing this show continue to gain momentum with listeners the past 6 months while losing money and propping it up out of my own pocket. But now I've got some help. The Long Run has a new marquee sponsor, PPD Biotech. That's right, today's sponsor is PPD Biotech. As your drug development advances, it's critical to select the right CRO partner for your innovative therapy. With a full set of development services and global reach, PPD Biotech offers teams that are dedicated to biotech and small pharma. PPD Biotech knows that every milestone, every project update, every change in direction is important. Committed to close alignment and cultural fit, PPD Biotech works as an extension of your team every step of the way to find innovative solutions that get your treatments to the clinic faster. To learn more about PPD Biotech or to schedule a meeting with us at the upcoming JP Morgan conference, visit www.ppdbiotech.com/longrun. I'll repeat that, www.ppdbiotech.com/longrun. Thank you. And with that, I hope you'll enjoy our conversation with Krishna Yeshwant. With me today on The Long Run is Krishna Yeshwant. He's a partner with GV, formerly known as Google Ventures. Do we still say that, Krishna, or have people figured out the name change after a year or so?
I think it still shows up as GV parentheses, formerly known as Google Ventures. Sometimes you get kind of a double hit. It's both GV and Google Ventures, but we are officially GV.
Well, you are the corporate venture capital arm of Alphabet, formerly known as Google, the family of companies. So, and you're a very active biotech investor. So, real pleasure to have you here on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, Krishna, I think you're the first guest I've had on this show who actually interviewed me first. I met you last year. You had me speak at Google Cambridge about my hood book for the most part.
That's right.
And shameless plug here, you are an avid Timmerman Report subscriber. Thank you very much. Although I really don't know when you find time to read my stuff.
It's one of the things I try and look at every morning if I can, and usually it's every so few days that there's something there. But yeah, I always find that your analysis and summarizations and insights are really valuable.
Well, okay, now that we got that out of the way, thank you. As a physician and a businessman and a biotech venture capitalist, before we get into like your whole career arc, just real quick, I want to ask you, like, what are some of your 3 or 4, say, most important go-to publications that you read that are kind of essential parts of your information diet?
It's interesting. I mean, nowadays there's so many kind of digests. So every morning I'll get some Axios array of things. I'll get the endpoints thing. Timmerman report. These are all things that I usually see every morning. Term sheet shows up there. So all that stuff is kind of like I'm definitely going to start the day with that. There's a variety of things on the clinical side that are similar, digests of interesting guidelines that are changing and interesting papers that are coming out. So should try and keep track of a lot of that stuff. We have our own internal digest at GV that I keep track of. So I feel like the first part of my morning is usually just getting through a whole bunch of stuff that's happened. And then I will go to Hacker News frequently, which is its own sort of digest and keeps me at least somewhat connected to the tech world. And what I love about that site is that there's a lot of programmers and people who build things on the site, and that usually helps me keep a good pulse of what's going on in the tech universe. I check out New England Journal, Nature on the regular cycles, Science and Cell as those come out. Health Affairs, I think but if I were to go to the top 3 things that I actually really see every morning, it's that set of digests that usually show up in my inbox.
I ask you that partly because it's a reflection of who you are and what you do. Investing at that intersection of biology and technology, you need to gather information from a wide variety of sources. And we'll get into some of what you specifically do. But okay, now let's just take this from the start. Where did you come from? Where were you born and raised?
I grew up just outside of Chicago, so one of the suburbs in the northwest corner of the Chicago area. And I have, my parents are still out there. It's a place called Barrington, and it's kind of the quiet suburbs of Chicago, and it was always very exciting for us to go into the big city. That's where I grew up.
What did your parents do for a living?
Both my parents are doctors. Everybody in my family is a doctor. My brother's a doctor. My parents are doctors. Aunts and uncles, everybody's a physician. And my dad's an oncologist specifically, and my mom is a primary care doctor. And she, in addition to running her primary care practice, got into geriatrics, and then additionally essentially took over running my dad's practice for a while, and has since stepped back from that. But I think it was really watching both of them in community practice, and kind of seeing the entrepreneurship that was part of that. It's not just clinical medicine. You are also hiring a whole bunch of people and trying to keep a whole bunch of partners all aligned in some direction for where the clinic needs to grow. There's always hospital relationships, interactions with other specialists. During Christmas and Thanksgiving, a large portion of my time was really organized around making gifts for other physicians. We'd wrap up all these these nuts that my parents would have us then deliver to physicians who were referring patients to them, and back and forth. And it was just kind of this interesting thing where, as a kid at least, we got to see some of the inner workings of how their business worked.
Wow. So you got to hear about things like hospital politics, referral patterns, Medicare reimbursement, ever since you were, like knee high to a grasshopper.
Oh yeah. Very much so. And it's still, for better or worse, still kind of the topic of conversation in my household. When we go back for Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever, that is what we talk about. It's almost, my wife's also a physician, but the second we start going down, this EMR versus that EMR, or how CMS is looking at something, most of the rest of my family starts to check out. Even the physicians start to check out. But my parents, they ran this small practice. They came from India in the 70s, started this practice like so many other people. Started it really with nothing, and I think there's a part of it which is just PTSD from having gone through all of that. That just they're at an age where they really should just retire. and it's part of their identity.
Okay, so medicine runs in the family. Do you have siblings?
I have a younger brother who's an electrophysiologist who just moved to Chicago to work at the VA.
Okay. And how old are you, by the way?
I'm 40.
Okay, the milestone year.
Yeah.
But I'll ask you later what you're going to do to celebrate. But you
already done.
You
My
actually...
wife threw me a phenomenal surprise party.
Okay, so everybody in the family is into medicine. You end up studying computers at Stanford. That was your first stop as an undergrad, right?
Yeah, and if we're going step by step, there was a step before undergrad. So I went to Barrington High School for my freshman year, and then in Illinois, or in the Chicagoland area, there's a school called the Illinois Math and Science Academy, IMSA, and it's based in Aurora, Illinois, and it's a residential school. It's a public high school, so it's funded through the same funds that the University of Illinois system is funded through. And it's a magnet school, which is made up of half of the students, 200 students per class, starts sophomore year, and half the class is made up of people who get in on merit, and half of the class is made to be representative of the state of Illinois. And so I basically moved there my sophomore year.
How did you get in?
I applied, and took the SATs in 7th grade, basically, and you apply as an 8th grader or 9th grader, I think. So I took them in 7th and 8th grade, and then my freshman year, I applied and got in. They don't tell you which one. I can't tell if I was the representative of the state or
okay.
But I obviously I'd worked really hard, had good grades, and got into this school.
So were you being a little bit of a teenage rebel at this point? Like I'm gonna go into math and science, not necessarily go into medicine?
At that point, IMSA still has a lot of people who are really interested in biology and pre-med and all that stuff. But really, it was where I started to veer away from the medical path. I got connected very quickly with a whole tremendous Unix computer system that they had installed throughout the university, and we had T1 lines running into the dorm rooms, and my roommates and dorm mates were all deep into computer science, and so I just got super deep into that world. It was a place where there was a graphics arts computer lab that they basically let us set up as students, and we must have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, buying scanners and computers that a bunch of people ended up using. But it was just this amazing place where you could really be involved in the guts of making the environment what you wanted it to be. And it really had two effects on me. One is I got much deeper into computer science and got very excited about what computers could do. I had been going into it, but it just took it to a whole other level. And I think it's really where, my interest in entrepreneurship started to develop into something that felt like it could be something different than starting my own doctor's office, right? Which is kind of where I was with my parents. And then, I was just surrounded by people who, a lot of them went off and started great technology companies.
So if you're just turning 40, you're a little bit younger than me. This means you would have graduated high school right around, say, 96. Is that right?
Yeah, you got it. So we saw Netscape
So this is when the internet is just, like you said, T1 lines, but you're just beginning to go online. So this is a pretty exciting time. You can get information now. Hearing you describe this environment in high school, the first thing that it makes me think of is, the famous old stories about Bill Gates and Paul Allen. When they were schoolmates together, their school, way back when, didn't have those kind of resources that you describe, but the University of Washington down the street did. And so they snuck in and catch some computer time and indulge their curiosity and hone their skills. It sounds a little bit like, you and your buddies had access to this kind of.
And I think the nature of kids is to kind of just push whatever you have in front of you to whatever the logical extreme was. So I remember, for instance, we all had to do these history presentations. Actually, one of my friends had to do a presentation for gym class. And so, we all wanted to do presentations. We didn't want to just go up and do a chalk talk. We wanted to make a presentation. But none of us, I don't think PowerPoint was a thing then. I don't think it existed. But we all figured out that there was this thing called Director, and we all figured out how to hack it and use it. And we made kind of this version of PowerPoint that we each spent just weeks on. We'd bring our computers to each other's houses and program these presentations and different sorts of visualizations of whatever it was that we could convince ourselves was worth the time to do. And so it was kind of like that, where we wanted the computers to do something. It wasn't clear how to get them to do it, and then we just had infinite time. And we just used that time to try and hack the computers to do the thing that we thought they should be able to do.
Did you have a particular teacher or mentor, somebody who said, you ought to push yourself and aim high? A little bit like, you've read my Hood book, so he had a teacher like that in high school. Yeah. Many people do.
Yeah, I thought of one person when I read that part of the book. For me, it was somebody named Dr. Victory, Jim Victory, who is a history teacher at IMSA. And, honestly, just to say it, I'd been very, ambitious and I think, I'd done very well in all my classes, going into IMSA. And, he was probably the first person where he called me into his office. It was within the first 3 weeks of starting school. And he's like, you could do better than this. And I was kind of stunned, honestly. He really interestingly pushed us into using data in understanding the context of the times that we were looking at and studying. He introduced us to all these different resources that I'd never really considered part of history. It was all the census reports and all these other sort of, agricultural data reports that you could just get access to. And then we started entering it all into Excel and analyzing it and trying to see, well, what implication would that have for how people might have been feeling about things then? And he just totally transformed my perspective from, I need to read something and then kind of regurgitate it to I need to read it and really synthesize it. And what that means is a creative process, actually, where you can really push yourself. And it just made a number of things infinitely more exciting to me.
Okay, so this is a formative experience, it sounds like. Then you go off to Stanford, study computer science. What did mom and dad think of this?
I think they initially were probably just confused and somewhat unaware of what I was doing.
Why aren't you going into medicine?
Yeah, I think they probably thought, my parents are not really what people think of. I think when they think of Indian parents who are doctors, they didn't really push me to go into anything. I don't think they particularly cared whether I was going to be a doctor or not. I think, they lived medicine and as a small practice long enough to know that, this is not a glamorous life. It's a hard life. And yes, you can make some money, but it's not just like people are handing it to you. It's you're putting the hours in. So I don't think they ever had some dream that we were going to go into medicine. In point of fact, they just wanted us to find a direction we were passionate about and then just push on that and go as far as we could.
Okay, so this sounds pretty good. You weren't a disappointment anyway.
No. I think they've always been really supportive and excited about things that we're interested in. I just think as I got deeper into computers, it became more esoteric and they just didn't know much about the space. So to the extent that I was talking about databases and relational databases, and this is what's possible, and here's the latest and greatest of what's happening in network security or network infrastructure. It's different than if I'm talking to them about the latest chemotherapeutic agent that and how effective it is or isn't, or what reimbursement strategies look like. It's just not that they weren't interested in what my career was where it was going. It's just I started getting technically deeper in areas that they didn't have direct knowledge of.
Yeah, I'd rather talk to you about oncology than some of that other stuff too.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's the late 1990s, and you're at Stanford. This is the original .com boom. This is exciting stuff. What were the things that animated your interest in those years?
Man, it was just like everybody was excited about everything, and almost anything was possible. And you definitely had a distinct sense of that famous Silicon Valley term of FOMO, of fear of missing out, and that was just permeating every part of what we were doing. computer science was certainly a popular major, but I think right now computer science is the most popular major at Stanford. It was definitely not that at the time. I very quickly realized that I'm in Shangri-La of sorts, or maybe more appropriately, I was in the Hollywood of the industry I was interested in. So I would drive down El Camino Road and just see these companies that at that time, you'll remember, like, people still, even though the internet was becoming bigger, people still really bought most of their software in boxes. And so I'd have these boxes of software and I'd see the address on the back, and, you just drive past that company, or, go visit Apple or go visit Intel. And it was just kind of, honestly, just awe-inspiring. I remember walking into this company called BIOS, B operating system, and it was the former CEO of Apple who'd left to start this company. And I literally just saw the company's logo on El Camino, and I just stopped, and I was like, this is amazing. It's right here, right down the street from Stanford. I just walked in, and I happened to walk into the whole engineering team just meeting, and they just were awesome. They let me come in, and they showed me this computer system they were building, and they let me just kind of be with them. And I was just astonished, and just made me all the more excited to go deeper and deeper into computer science. And it always struck me as an amazing field, because you could really, as an individual, think about something and then go create it. With a team, without a team, you could just go create stuff. And the classmates I had from Stanford computer science, that time and era, they've all gone off to do these amazing things. And it's just I think the spirit that was permeating the place, I have no doubt is still very much there now. But as I was getting deeper and deeper into computer science, I came to the realization that I still was interested in entrepreneurship. And kind of my junior year, I got connected with a couple other people as we kind of started thinking about, whether we should try and start something together. And our thought was really that rather than trying to start a product company, because we didn't really know how to do that, we thought we'd start a consulting sort of company, and maybe we could make a little bit of money over the summer. That would be more than if we were interns at one of the big software companies. And we started off kind of building out a senior project that was essentially, in retrospect, it was really in this field of extracting data from databases. So it was really ETL. So basically being able to take data from one data set and transform it so that it could fit into another database the right way. And we basically spent our junior year building out this software package, and then really we leading into the summer of our junior year, we found a couple customers who were willing to let us kind of try our stuff on their systems. Basically, we were building database-backed websites for people, and we did that.
So this is the proverbial two guys in a dorm room, or maybe an off-campus house.
Absolutely, that's absolutely what it was. We could go to the dorm. I'm sure it's still there, and we kind of had a bunch of people just kind of sweating away in that room, and it was kind of a heaven of sorts.
You actually did two tech companies, right, as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So the first company we ended up growing, we did a lot of things wrong, to be honest about it. And again, being a venture person now and having been doing this for about 10 years, I can clearly look back and say that we did almost everything wrong. And the thing that saved us was really that, it was like 1998, 1999. So almost everything kind of just worked, even if it shouldn't have.
What was one thing you did wrong?
So I described here that I went to this, math and science high school, and then went to Stanford. And, one of the things that you find in these sorts of environments is that everybody around you is generally pretty trustworthy. And so you can go to a class and say, hey, you go build this thing and I'll build this thing, and then we'll come back together and we'll integrate them, and it's going to be awesome. And then you go do that, and you come back, and then largely you do that. You integrate it, and it's awesome. And in the real world, that's not at all how it works, right? Like, you can't trust everybody. And you go out and you hire some people, and you say, okay, you go do this thing and you go do that thing. And then people come back and, like, maybe they didn't do it, or they didn't do it well, or, and just the realization that that trust works in this much more complicated way than just, yes, you can trust somebody or no, you can't. And it's formed a real philosophical foundation for me now where, I start off, you have to start off with some trust. You can't not trust anybody. But then, if you have a level of expectation for where things are going to be and then somebody exceeds that, then, you can rapidly get to a place of high trust. And then the problem is when you have an expectation and you fall short of that, that differential tends to feel like pain. And the problem that I experienced in that company was very high expectations, very low realization of those expectations. And that was a huge amount of pain that we went through. And
that's the human part, and people fail. But, there are other things that people do that tend to get lawyers involved.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I'm sure you learned about too.
Yeah, we definitely had a couple instances like that. But thankfully, in the end, it was such a weird environment that, things were growing. Nobody had the time to sue each other. I'm sure people were suing each other when there was real money involved. But it was really just like, yeah, okay, that happened. Let's just keep building because there's something bigger on the next hill. And that, thankfully kind of worked out more or less with the first company. And then one of my good friends from college and I went to work on a second company, which was really formatted in a fundamentally different way. It was really in the network security space. And was really much more connected first to what a customer need was. The first company, we kind of made a mistake also of we started the company because we wanted to start a company, which is usually the worst reason to go do a company.
Often that leads to a solution in search of a problem.
You got it. So that's actually exactly what we had. And we with the second company, we really started by talking to customers and spent a year or so just understanding what it was that would be helpful. And we kind of started building some stuff in the middle of that. And it became clear that there was an opportunity in an aspect of network security where we could build something that would almost certainly be valuable. And so once we said we were going to do that, we had some people who we knew we could trust, who we kind of brought back into the team. We had some money of our own that we could use to finance at least the early pieces of the company. And the whole thing just went in a completely different fashion. It ended up being a very robust company. And to some degree, that company was acquired by Symantec. And in the end, if there was any mistake we made, it might have been selling the company because it turns out to be so hard to get to that point where you have something that's really working that why would you sell it? You just kind of keep growing it.
So you sell the company. And how old are you at this point?
Oh, it must have been 22 or so. 21, 22.
22,
yeah.
And you've sold your second company.
Yeah.
Okay, and now, so you presumably put some money in your pocket. Yeah. I mean, you're not, Zuckerberg rich, but,
no, I felt like that. I felt like, I could go do anything now.
Go out and buy a new car?
Yeah, I was driving a Corolla, and I was like, time to upgrade.
Okay, but then you decide to go to medical school. You move east, Harvard Medical School. What was that about?
Well, so there's a part before that. So I was working, at Symantec basically, and we basically had a large set of things. We were, obviously we were selling into a lot of groups in Virginia and East Coast, and so I was spending more and more time out east. My dad got sick, and he's thankfully totally fine now. But I spent a lot of time in the hospital with him, really less as being his son and just following him on rounds, which is what I'd done before, and more with being with him being a patient. And that was quite eye-opening for me. And I kind of had a sense that if I wanted to do a third software company, enterprise IT company, I felt like I kind of had a reputation. I felt like I could. I felt like I knew who I'd raise money from and who I'd want to do it with, and how even there were some things in the second company we did that I'd do differently, and but kind of being with my dad during that time, I kind of felt like I wanted to do something really different, and I felt like I could make more money. I could, really in those companies, my job was to take $1 and make it into a multiple of that. And it just felt like if I was doing that, honestly, at 40 was actually a specific age I had in my mind at the time where I felt like, if I'm doing the same thing when I'm 40, I think I'm going to be really disappointed. It feels like I'll just been in a rut up until that point, and then I'll wake up and be kind of surprised. And And so I kind of felt like what I really want to do is have some impact on just this messy, silly, kind of brutal system that that we get our healthcare through. And I didn't know what that meant, really. And so I just started spending a lot of time reading and talking to anybody who would talk to me about it. I looked up people's websites and just started learning more and more about all these different institutions. And I just kept getting drawn back to labs in Boston. The Broad Institute had been started and the first human genome had been sequenced. I was spending a lot of time looking at things in that realm. You maybe came across, I spent a lot of time in the graphics side of the universe when I was at Stanford and high school. And so I always had a passion for that. And I got drawn into this lab that's a collaboration between Brigham and Women's, Children's Hospital, and the MIT Computer Science Lab. And it's called the Surgical Planning Lab. And the concept was, to use computer-aided design principles in surgery.
Wait, so were you enrolled as a biological sciences graduate student before medical school, or did this morph into medical school?
No, yeah, I was kind of like just I was at that point, honestly, I was just a free agent of sorts. And I kind of like found that lab. I talked to them, and I thought, I know I can do something cool for this group because I know how to program. They want to ingest a whole bunch of different imaging modalities. I didn't know what DICOM was at that time, but I figured that I could figure it out. And then like once I got it into the computer, that I could do all sorts of stuff that would be interesting and helpful to help plan procedures. And my dad had gone through this procedure, and I thought, well, how did they plan it? Why did they do it that way? And I just thought, well, why aren't they using any of these principles, any of these tools that we've been using forever in other industries, like computer design principles and software? Why aren't they using that in surgery? And I thought that was an interesting thesis, and it served the role of both being interesting and I thought potentially impactful, important, but also gave me access to a lot of things. So that lab was interesting because it's in the basement of the Brigham, and it's kind of a collaboration between the surgery department and the radiology department. And I thought, it'd just be a place where I could go do something meaningful for that group by just writing software, which I knew how to do. And maybe some of these people would just let me follow them around, and just let me be in the hospital and see what does an MRI machine, look like, and how does that work, and how does surgery happen?
When you say free agent, I mean, you're a job, you have a job as a technician or like a software person there?
Yeah. So initially it was literally, I was honestly just freely volunteering my time and said, look, I know how to build software systems. Can I be helpful here? And they said, yes, please build it. There's a guy, Ron Kakinis, who's still there. And he's like, yeah, please go ahead.
If you enjoy listening to these interviews with biotech newsmakers, you'll love reading Timmerman Report. You can subscribe to Timmerman Report for $149 a year per person. Discounts are available for companies and universities with multiple readers. More than 60 pharma companies and universities have gotten group licenses, which come with a discount. For more information, write to me at luke@timmermanreport.com. And today's sponsor of the show is PPD Biotech. As your drug development advances, it's critical to select the right CRO partner for your innovative therapy. With a full set of development services and global reach, PPD Biotech offers teams that are dedicated to biotech and small pharma. PPD Biotech knows that every milestone, every project update, every change in direction is important. Committed to close alignment and cultural fit, PPD Biotech works as an extension of your team every step of the way to find innovative solutions that get your treatments to the clinic faster. To learn more about PPD Biotech or to schedule a meeting with them at the upcoming JP Morgan conference, visit www.ppdbiotech.com/longrun. Please do check out that link, ppdbiotech.com/longrun. If you go there and schedule a meeting, you will not only check out the services of a leading CRO, but you will also help prove the value of the Long Run podcast to this sponsor and future sponsors who want to keep these conversations with industry leaders going. You end up getting on track through and going to medical school.
Yep.
How did this morph into, your interest? You hadn't been interested in becoming a doctor, and now you're becoming a doctor.
Yeah, so developed all this software. We applied it in a bunch of surgical cases, and there's a particular group at Mass General which does a lot of craniofacial reconstructive work, which ended up using that software pretty extensively. And they just adopted me. They let me, I got hired in as a research assistant or something, and they let me. I think I was a research fellow, a CIMMIT research fellow at some point. And they said, yeah, why don't you just build the software for these surgical procedures, and then you could join us in the operating room and you see how it works, and you could come with us to clinic and show the patients like how these designs are going to work. And they just totally let me do that. And I just lived at MGH for like morning, evening. I slept there. I was just there all the time. And they just let me do that. And I met the other fellows who were working on other things like tissue engineering stuff and wound healing, and it just gave me this rich exposure to a whole bunch of stuff. It actually filled a really deep sense of purpose that I was kind of searching for in my work. And I wasn't pigeonholed. I could be working on IP one day and coding something the other day, be in the operating room another day, in the clinic another day, and I felt like I could have this kind of multimodal sort of week with a lot of different textures of interaction. And I came away from that really just loving patient care. And once I came to that realization, I realized, well, to do patient care, I need to go to medical school. To go to medical school, I need to take all these pre-med classes and apply to medical, and take the MCATs and apply to medical. And then I did that.
This sounds like torture, Krishna.
It's kind of, it does in some ways, but, I think if I went through that at Stanford, I would have felt like it was torture. But really, I kind of went through it as a vocation. I took night classes at Harvard Extension School and studied for all these things. And, I don't know, I didn't need to have a job really at the time. And I found it really fun. I found it honestly just super intellectually engaging. It gave me a phenomenal foundation. It gave me both a foundation in the science and a vocabulary that I didn't really have before, as well as comfort in how to navigate a hospital system. I had to figure out ways to kind of, we had these patients, they'd go through these research scanners, and I had to figure out, how do you get the data from there into the computer? And it's like, to do that, there's all these weird back channel things that have to happen in a hospital, and you have to go through certain regulatory procedures. And it's just like, I had to do that. I didn't have really a staff to do that, and I'd just do that. And there were all sorts of things. We did animal studies that happened, in the animal lab. And I just never saw all those things. The surgeons let me do all sorts of stuff and just be in places that I thought were, otherwise inaccessible.
All this stuff was hard and inefficient then. This would have been in the mid-2000s. Much of it is still hard and inefficient today.
The same. It's unchanged. It's unchanged, between then and now. But yeah, for me, it's all learning, right? It's all just a sense of okay, these are all the things that we're going to need to fix. And the intent is really to help the patient. And honestly, it also helped the physician, because a lot of, what was striking to me about those surgeons was, as an entrepreneur, I thought I worked really hard. And I'm sure I did. I was working really hard, but then I went to meet the surgeons, and they would show up at Children's Hospital at 4:30 in the morning, pre-round, present internally, and then start cases at 7. And it was just, surgical cases, be in the operating room, and then go off and finish the day with clinic, and then write their notes. And then they were also editors of their paper, their research journals. And I thought, wow, these people are taking, a mission to a whole nother level. They have no equity in this hospital, right? There's no venture backing. They're just doing it because it's important. And I took that hook, line, and sinker. And that's what drove me to doing medical school.
You get your MD, you do a residency. Was this at Brigham and Women's?
Mm-hmm.
So you move on into residency. What were you thinking you'd specialize in?
So I did an MD MBA, I'll say, and it was really in the middle of the MBA where I started working at Google, interestingly. And then if you'd asked me before I went to Google what I was going to do, I would have said that I was going to be a surgeon, because that's what all my mentors had done. Or at least my most recent mentors, and I loved it. And then I went to business school, and I came to Google during the summer of business school, and that's when I started. That's when I met 2 other people who were working on what this concept of Google Ventures was. They were working on what ultimately became Google Ventures, and I kind of joined up with them. Google Health was kind of a thing at that time as well. So I got to see that early version of Google's efforts there.
That was the electronic health records.
The personal health record concept back then. And,
Yep.
and I kind of quickly came to the realization that I am going to be involved in these sorts of things. There's just too much impact one can have using these sorts of platforms to get to the ultimate goal that I started this path, this journey into medicine on. And I had a hard time seeing how I would be a great surgeon, a clinically good surgeon, if I was also splitting my time into all these other things. When I remembered back to the craniofacial folks I'd worked with, the surgeons who were the very best were not necessarily the ones who were publishing the most. They were the ones who were in the operating room all the time. And I realized that if I'm going to be doing some of this other stuff, then that means I'm not going to be in the operating room all the time. And I had the thought of, well, if I was, if I had to pick who my family member was going to go to for a procedure, it would be the person who's in the operating room all the time. So if to the extent that I'm going to be a clinician, I want to be a clinician in an area where I can be a great clinician in that domain, while also being able to have access to the entrepreneurial and other sorts of technology infrastructure and other stuff that I thought was interesting to be doing.
This sounds a little bit, it reminds me of Atul Gawande's old book, Complications, about, basically the surgeons aren't perfect.
You got it.
They need to practice and learn.
It was exactly that book that I'd read. I was reading that book, and I think somewhere in that book, or it was somewhere in some of Atul's writing that he wrote that, it's all about volume. That's what's associated with, well, I think it was the Shoulder's Hospital, if I'm recalling, from that book. And that argument made a lot of sense to me. And I thought, okay, well, look, like if I'm going to be a surgeon, then I better be a freaking surgeon and because that's what those patients deserve. And I came to that conclusion about most procedure-oriented specialties, as well as things like radiology and things where like that repetition. I think it's true everywhere, but those arenas in particular.
So now you get the MD, MBA. What year was this? Something like 2008?
2009 is when I graduated with both degrees.
2009. Okay, so this is financial crisis is on. Lots of interesting stuff is happening in biotech. We're sort of beginning to really reap some of that long-term investment in basic science, but not a lot of venture capital was being put to work at that time. Google, yep, on the other hand, is going gangbusters as a business and looking for new opportunities. Who approaches you with this idea of, maybe you can take some of the stuff and put it to work here for Google Ventures?
That story started in 2007, 2008. So in the middle of business school, you do a summer someplace. I was going to do my summer at the MGH intensive care unit because I thought I need to know how to work in an intensive care unit before going to residency. And I saw all my classmates from business school going off to all these cool things. So I thought, well, maybe I should do those cool things or do something cool. This might be my last chance to do something out of the box before getting on the train of residency and fellowship and wherever that's going to go. So I went to Google and I met two people, Bill Maris and Rich Miner, who were tasked with trying to figure out what Google Ventures should be. And I was officially working in this group called New Business Development, NBD. And they were looking across a variety of different new areas of business for Google, one of which was Google Health and other things in energy and all this other stuff they were thinking about, one of which was venture. Should we do a venture fund? If so, how should we do it? And I remember Bill Maris came and he gave this presentation to the NBD group. And I thought, this guy seems like very approachable. And, I know something about venture and I know something about, some of these industries. And so I set up a meeting with him and we had a great conversation and he had me, talk to Rich back when I came back to Boston after that summer. And Megan Smith, who was running the group at the time, she said, hey, look, and she went off to be the White House CTO for a bit. But, anybody who knows her will hear this in her voice where she's just like, hey, you're doing interesting stuff here. Why don't you just kind of keep doing this part-time, when you go back to school? And I thought, wow, that's amazing. I consulted with one of my good friends, Sachin Jain, who's now CEO of CareMore, and he told me, that's a pretty good deal. You should go do that. And I jumped at the opportunity. And then I worked with Bill and Rich. We spent about a year talking to every venture fund that would talk to us. And those guys gave me a real opportunity.
Okay, Krishna, I want to ask you now more about GV. You found some people that you could work with. You had some interesting combination of skills here in computer science and medicine. But I think I've asked you this before. There was you need a big break. You needed somewhere to start in venture, and I think was Adimab your first real investment?
Yeah.
The one that got you kind of wired into Boston venture capital.
Yeah, probably that was definitely our first healthcare investment. And yeah, I don't know if that was my break. I did all the diligence behind the company and wrote up all this stuff and like diligence never to have been achieved again. Like I just had so much time. I just poured it all into this company and was very convinced that it was going to be a great company for us to invest in. And Bill ended up taking the board seat on it and ended up being a great company. Introduced us to amazing people, Terry McGuire and a variety of folks, the SV Life Sciences folks, and Eric and Tillman. And these are all just people we continue to love and try to work with any chance we get.
Now, for those not familiar, Adimab has got a yeast-based platform for antibody drug discovery. Tillman Gerngross, Eric Anderson, a couple of others, venture capital firms that you mentioned. They're going to discover new antibody drugs, classic pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, and part of what I liked about the concept of us investing in Adimab was that it was an antibody development platform, not a therapeutics drug company, right? Because as you said, it was 2008, 2009 at that point, and nobody was investing in venture in biotech. Most of the funds were pulling back from biotech. I'm sure you remember several of the great funds just closed around that time, and here we were with a fresh new fund. A bunch of tech guys, kind of looking to do, biotech stuff, here and there. And I think people were probably confused by what we were really going to do. And I think the tech world was confused by what we were going to do for that matter. But Adimab struck me as a company that probably wasn't going to just implode. Right. One, you have Tillman, who's a second-time successful founder, having done Glycofy before. You have some phenomenal venture people around the table. And it was not a binary risk. This was a platform, so they were gonna enable a bunch of other people to take binary risk, maybe, but their platform would continue to grow. And as you know, since then they've gone off and started off separate companies that themselves have taken on more risky, specific therapeutics projects. But Adimab itself.
Yeah, Adimab was built for independence from the get-go. Tillman didn't really, it had that LLC structure. It was going to hive off programs for its partners. Yep. The partners could take the development risk. Adimab would keep discovering off of that platform.
You got it.
We'll discover more and more antibodies against more and more targets, keep raking in actual revenue, and find a way to pay back our investors with dividends over time. It was kind of a novel structure at the time. A few people have replicated it since. But it was suited to that time, which was not quite as bullish or frothy maybe as the current day.
Quite right. It's a true statement.
Okay. So this is really your first investment, and I mean, from pretty early on, this looked pretty good. So I mean, this probably didn't hurt with your bosses back in Mountain View. You're doing okay. Now, like fast forward. You've got, I looked on your webpage, you've got something like 30 companies active in your portfolio, therapeutics, diagnostics, some genomics, electronic health records in there too. I mean, lots of stuff going on. I don't know how you keep up with it all. How do you?
I think one of the phenomenal things about being in venture is that you can really follow themes. And theses across a whole wave, and it's different than being in a company, right? In a company, you're on the hook for every detail, and it's actually one of the frustrating things about being in venture is that you're not on the hook for every detail, and you sometimes miss. As somebody who's been in an operational role and is now in a venture role, I miss that piece. I miss the camaraderie of being in a team that's together every single day, working on a specific problem. That's the great thing about being in a company. But the great thing about being in venture is that you can have kind of these broad-reaching theses, hypotheses that if they pan out, should change the industry in some fundamental way.
Okay, so what are these theses that guide your thinking?
It ranges across all of these areas that you're talking about, and And I'm not proposing to you that I have the answers to any of these, but what I think we've been able to do is find important areas, and then ideally find phenomenal people who are equally passionate, if not more passionate, about trying to find a solution in those areas. And then you generally know that if you have great people working on something important and they succeed, that's going to be a valuable company. So we could talk about any of those domains. We could talk about some of the interesting things that happen at intersections of those domains. But that's kind of how I keep track of it. Is it's not company by company to some degree. Occasionally it is. There's certainly companies that I spend a lot of time with and try to be helpful in very granular ways. And then there's other companies that are, we're looking at, and because we're looking at the field in a broad fashion, we can spend the time developing connectivity that we can then bring to that company and hopefully accelerate in kind of a thesis-driven fashion. So in therapeutics, the obvious ones, certainly we see the benefit of working in oncology and orphan diseases because you have disease models that can be more representative of what human biology actually looks like, and we have an impact on genetic insight from these diseases. So that's led us down one set of paths. It certainly helped us get into the concept of foundation medicine, which is one of our investments before from earlier in GV's life.
Genomic information for cancer. That's one of those data tech plays that meets biology.
Exactly, and that investment led us to the thought process around, what happens to those patients who are sequencing, and we send them a report saying you have all these different mutations. What happened to that patient? Did they get therapy? Did it work? Did it not work? Did they have a reaction? What happened? And that's what prompted our interest in the concept that ultimately became Flatiron. And so that all kind of came from a single thesis area.
You got lots of cool science in here, though. Just in therapeutics, where I'm looking at, you got a microbiome play with Evelo. You've got an antibiotics discovery company with Sparrow. Computer-aided drug discovery with Relay. Elector is another prolific discovery shop. Some of the same people from Adimab, actually, for this time for Alzheimer's and neurodegeneration. There's some patterns here.
Yeah, you're picking up on all of it, right? So Elector, we'd certainly been looking at the interaction between the immune system and neurology. We knew neurology would be an interesting area to be investing in over time. And then looking for orphan diseases and genetically driven diseases, or genetically qualified diseases at the very least, which I think Elector came to independently. It's not like we went and founded Elector. They came to us through the Tillman universe, and you can see in that both we're doing our homework, we're spending a lot of time on the science. Our team is all MDs, PhDs, MD PhDs, who are following these areas of science because that's what we're passionate about. But we're also following people, right? So Tillman's somebody we trust. So we can have a debate and talk about something interesting, and if he's excited about something, we're probably going to be excited about something. And you can see that.
This sounds a little bit like my last guest on the show, Julie Sunderland from Biomatics, who I know you know.
Yeah, of course.
Sort of like step one in due diligence, like the science has just got to check out. It's got to be exciting and it's got to check out. But then all the due diligence is about people and getting the right people around the table to make that thing happen. Okay. Now, while you're doing all this stuff, you still see patients twice a week at Brigham and Women's. Is that right?
Yeah, I see patients. I pulled back to once a week. I just had clinic this morning, and that's been an important part of my identity. And it's for some people, I think they have a clinical life that somehow informs their venture life, and there's probably some part of this that does that. But for me, it's always been kind of an independent thing. I like patient care. I'm a primary care doc there, and it's not like our latest immuno-oncology things kind of have some direct read onto my primary care clinic. Occasionally, I have a lot of cancer patients, and we can at least talk about things and direct people in maybe more sophisticated ways sometimes. But really, it's not about that at all for me. It's really that I like being a doctor. I like trying to help people on usually really hard times of their life.
You're not conducting market research on rounds or
no. I mean, I wish I could tell you.
Complaining about Epic medical records around the water cooler with your colleagues.
No, I mean, I'll do that surely, but it's not like I'm doing that in order to inform the venture side. It's honestly purely selfish. I really like patient care. I like being in the hospital environment, and I do it even though it makes no economic sense to do it. Like my time could probably be more leveraged by deploying this large fund that we have into more more companies. But I think I would burn out without it in some fashion.
You mentioned the size of the fund. So you see patients once a week, and it's a nice thing to do. It keeps you grounded. I get that. How big is your actual fund?
I don't think we officially say how big it is. I think it's more like a few $1 billion under management sort of thing. But it's in the several $100 million per year sort of range.
Okay, how is it structured? Is it like an evergreen fund, or do you get kind of an annual allocation? And
it's more or less every year. There's an amount that's essentially grown every year, or something, not every year, but every so often grows as we see more opportunities. And then it's pretty flexible how it's been structured, where we invest in essentially whatever the partnership finds to be impactful, likely to be profitable, and with great people, and we largely make those decisions. That can sometimes take us far afield from things that the core of Google is doing. And sometimes it's things that are very well aligned and naturally connected to things that Google are doing. But as you're hearing, from the earlier part of the conversation, I'm not spending a lot of time thinking, where is Google going and how are they going to do something this way? We just purely look at where we think the market is, where we think the impact can occur, and where the science is, and obviously where great folks are, and we try to orient ourselves around that. And then just over time, some of those things happen to be really interesting and impactful to Google.
How many investing partners do you have there, and particularly on the life sciences side?
It's a good question. We have officially on the life sciences side, there's Blake Byers and myself, who are the two general partners. And then we have some phenomenal venture partners. So that's Anthony Folopakis out here in Boston. There's David Reshef. Also out here, Ben Robbins, also in Boston, Scott Davis, who's based out in New Hampshire, and then Vinitha Agarwala, who's based out at Stanford, and then we have some other folks that will continue growing into the team, but that's kind of been our core group to date, and we'll as you see those people, those are all MD PhDs. Who are all, I think, taking a similar approach as we're kind of looking for ways to be impactful in all these.
So you got two GPs. Presumably, there's other GPs in the tech investments and other things that GV does.
Correct.
So who do you actually report to?
I report to David Crane, who's the person who runs Google Ventures, and he's been part of Google Ventures really since essentially the beginning as well, and he's been part of Google since really part of way back in the beginning.
And what are your success metrics when you report to him at the end of the year, which actually might be coming up soon?
Yeah, right.
How do you get evaluated?
It's pretty straightforward, and one of the great things about being a venture fund is that in the end, it's all about how many dollars did Alphabet invest in us, and how many dollars do we return back to them.
Okay, so as corporate VCs go, they come in different flavors, strategic or financial. You're making a financial case. That's what you are. I mean, Google's not in the pharmaceuticals business. They're not going to acquire these companies.
It's a structure like that, and to me at least, what we really try to orient around is, we're trying to bring in people to Google Ventures who are at least of the caliber of what you'd find in other venture funds. In some ways, a lot of the people at GV are quite different because of the backgrounds that we try to search for, and we need to compensate people in a way that's really appropriate for what they're doing. Otherwise, other people will pick them up. So I think that's the way we've always looked at it. Is we want to be playing in an arena that is the top tier of venture, and so we need to be able to level set against what other folks do, because otherwise people go off and do other stuff. And so far we've been able to train everybody.
I do want to come back to this question of how you manage your time. I mean, now you're at this established point where I imagine deals come to you. You're syndicated with a lot of really top firms. You got 30 portfolio companies on your page. How many boards do you actually sit on at any given one time?
I try not to get over 10. Honestly, it's kind of gone down a little bit recently as we've had some exits of companies that I was on the board of. So it's freed up some time to do more stuff. So it's usually somewhere under 10. I think if I get down to 2 or 3, then I'm probably which is where it was in the very beginning. I'd be on 2 or 3 boards, and that felt like a lot at the time. But I think we've kind of figured out, how to do this in a different way. I mean, part of the strategy of Google Ventures is that we have a lot of operational support in the firm, and so frankly, I think there's a number of companies that will find the impact of those various teams, whether it's our design team, engineering, recruiting, marketing, partnerships, those teams can often have far more impact than any one of our general partners or venture partners in the space, because they have much deeper networks and they learn from the rest of our portfolio in a way that no one partner can learn. And so that's part of how we've been able to manage the volume on it. But yeah, I try and set
This is part of your value proposition to entrepreneurs too, right? Yeah. In that, if you take money from GV, you get Krishna or Blake on your board, maybe. That's nice. But you also get to tap into some of these additional people and resources that the mothership has.
That's just it. I mean, to the extent that a company is working in machine learning or data sciences or data infrastructure, or wants to see the latest and greatest of how to even organize an engineering team, or we just have such tremendous resources that we can pull on at any given moment, not just inside of GV, but inside of the rest of our ecosystem. So on those sorts of things, it's not just about us. I mean, the nature and culture of our team is very collaborative. We like to be helpful. We like to engage with each other's portfolios and really pull people from inside of Alphabet and Google into areas where there's like something really cool happening in a company, and make sure that people see that, okay, like your insights here could really move this in the right way. And lots of examples of how that's been helpful. And that's absolutely part of the brand and structure of how GV's grown from the very beginning to today.
Last big question I want to ask you, Krishna, is about your view of genomics. We've been hearing a lot about it for many years. I wrote a book about, a visionary of this area from the 1980s. And it's not as simple as some people might like it to believe. Like the ACG&T is not exactly, a digital code that dictates X, Y, and Z in our health. Yep. So computers can do a lot of cool things, but they can't give us all the answers that we want, not just yet. And partly as a result, we aren't willing to pay a whole lot for some of the information that's coming from this first wave. Foundation Medicine built a pretty good business. There's some others, Flatiron that you mentioned, that are trying to bring together biological and medical data in a coherent way to improve healthcare. But there's a lot of potholes along the way, a lot of black holes, companies that didn't make it. Yep. How do you think about this opportunity? What worries you about it? And where do you think the real winning companies are going to come from?
In today's world, I think it would probably be the wrong answer to look at genetics and genomics, data sets that are coming together and say there's just no value in them because it's so complicated. It's definitely complicated. It's just be naive not to think that and see it. And we've consistently as a field been out complexied by biology. So I think we enter this eyes wide open on the complexity we face on this. On the other hand, there's clearly a lot of insights that can be gained by looking at aggregated data sets and pulling out patterns and looking at exceptional responders, for instance, or looking for the sorts of patterns that exist when you start looking at larger and larger scale data sets in this space. With that said, I think one of the errors in the field historically has been that there's somehow value in targets, right? That pharma doesn't have enough targets, and if you could just identify the target, then somebody would be willing to pay something for that. And I think we all recognize, certainly one of the things we've learned is we've tried to take a humble approach in understanding how biotech works. The target's not actually worth all that much because who knows what it does downstream, and there's so much complexity that you could inadvertently step into if you just try drugging one thing. And even trying to drug that one thing turns out to be a non-trivial task. And so the stories, the narratives are great. And as with so many things, maybe one day we do enter a world where we just have a much deeper understanding of the fullness of the complexity on it, but we're not anywhere close to it today. But there are other fields, other approaches in computer science that are quite relevant, and one of them is just the hacker, right? Which is, look, you just try a whole bunch of stuff, and eventually you kind of get the system to do the thing that you're trying to get it to do, and you don't exactly know why, but it does it. The whole drug discovery field has an element of that, and there's a hunger and a passion for just getting the system to move in the right direction that you see in the drug hunter sort of mentality. So there is some similarity there, but it has an appreciation for the underlying complexity and lack of understanding we have for most of it. With that said, I look at the field and I think the values in the drugs, because the drugs are the place where you don't get to hide behind what is or isn't happening. You're going to run a large scale clinical trial. You're going to put up a lot of money to do it, and you're going to hopefully have some data out the other end that gives you some insights as to whether you were right or wrong about your hypothesis.
Therapeutics are still what we are willing to pay for as a society. But I did notice that you told, I think it was Chrissy Farr from CNBC not too long ago, that you're really intrigued about prevention. And maybe this is you wearing your doctor hat. But are there ways to actually do a better job at prevention and maybe even rewarding the people who come up with these kind of innovations?
So it's interesting, right? So yeah, when I talk to Chrissy, usually when I'm talking to Chrissy, it's in the context of usually payer provider, oriented innovation. And usually when you and I are talking, we're usually talking about biopharma and therapeutics and things in that realm. And it's one of the interesting things about the industry where it's like these are two separate communities. They're two separate investor communities, two separate entrepreneurial communities, even sometimes two separate geographies that some of this stuff happens in. But the reality is they all exist on a continuum in the same ecosystem. And oftentimes these two entities kind of polarize against one another, but they heavily influence each other. And when I think about something like prevention, part of it's around the science, of course. We need to know and understand what sorts of things we can be looking for to enable prevention. But I think just as big, maybe even, just as big, obviously you have to have the science. Maybe that's the sine qua non. But you also have to have a incentive structure that allows for people to act on prevention, to actually make it make sense to screen for things. And to me, that speaks to where value-based care goes. To the extent that we're in a fee-for-service system, screening is interesting because sometimes you pick things up and then you can charge for the downstream intervention. In a value-based care framework, we want to screen because we want to find something sooner so that somebody doesn't end up in a expensive site of care. If I can screen and find the colon cancer early, then somebody doesn't end up with a severe complication down the line in the emergency room, requiring a lot of expensive imaging and chemotherapy and all the other stuff that'll be sequela of that. And so I think the incentives are so important, and it's just hard to have the full aperture on it because when you're at the beginning of a drug discovery program, you're so focused on, is this thing going to work? That's the thing. It's like the thing you got to spend all of your time and effort and money on. And it's very hard to then take a big step back and think about, well, if it works, then how do we let communities across the socioeconomic spectrum, how do we let them have access to this? And it really is a design criteria that probably should be brought much earlier into the development process.
Sometimes 10 years go by in biopharma before people really think about that seriously.
Totally. But you can understand why, because you're going to have to raise $1 billion over time to get the thing, into patients and through the whole approval process. And by that time, like, who knows? Who knows what the reimbursement environment's going to look like? Maybe we're back to paying for everything. Maybe it's going to be, winter is here. Who knows? Like, and so, because drug development takes such a long time, you kind of have to focus on the science before you can start baking in some of those other costs sort of considerations.
Well, these incentives and business models really, really are crucial. And, it probably would do me some good to talk to you about some of this side of the business that I don't know as much about. I know Scott Gottlieb at the FDA thinks about this side and has been working on trying to create pathways for apps that monitor people in meaningful ways, talking with people over at CMS who, rightly need to look at the data with a hard, skeptical eye to make sure they're getting their money's worth for us taxpayers. But maybe I should send this podcast to Chrissy and she can send me some of her writing.
Well,
and we'll all do a big mind meld.
I would love that. I bet that we'd come up with some really cool insights because I'm convinced that some of the most exciting and tremendous opportunities actually exist in the intersection between these things. Going back to screening, for instance, it kind of gets back to, how do you drop the cost? How do you dramatically decrease the cost of caring for a patient with a particular illness? And in the end, as far as my logic takes me, it's by being able to accurately and precisely diagnose that somebody has this specific condition, and then to be able to provide some intervention that cures it. And the only way we can do that is by actually investing in the biopharma side of the universe to understand those diseases and cure them. And at the same time, we have to be able to take those insights and put them into the lowest cost of care where you can deliver them to the right parts of the population. And at least the observation I'd have is when we really can complete that cycle, it can actually just be pushed entirely into the consumer space. Because if you understand the disease and can truly cure it, you can start to control for all these toxicities that we worry about so much on the therapeutic side. It's not that it happens all the time that we can do that, but that to me is the criteria for really understanding and having an impact on disease is well, okay, can I just buy that at online or at a local pharmacy? And we're obviously not there with cancer. We're not anywhere close to that with almost any disease. We don't understand how most of the drugs that we prescribe really work. So I think it's a tall order. But to me, it does kind of illustrate why these things all are actually existing in the same universe and need to have much closer interaction. So if you do set up something with you and Chrissy, I'd be happy to moderate that.
Well, I think it does start with the biology, and once we figure out some of that hard biology, some of these other things can fall into place with the right kind of will and strategy. I mean, these are solvable problems.
I couldn't agree more.
With that, Krishna, thank you very much for joining me today on the Long Run podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and it's always I always learn something when I get to talk to you. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks for listening to The Long Run, a production of Timmerman Report. Pedro Rosado of Headstepper Media was the producer and editor. Music comes from D.A. Wallach. Thanks to PPD Biotech for sponsoring. And thanks to you for listening. See you next episode.